I think we have problems in both parties for sure, but the Republicans are, won the House and ironically have the same majority that the Democrats had for 2 years. When you have a slim majority, it's absolutely crucial to have full support from your party. And I hope Kevin McCarthy is probably the only one who could get that.
Well, Greg Swenson is chairman of Republicans Overseas, and he joins me to talk through that extraordinary night of high drama. Now, morning, Greg.
Hi, how are you? Glad to be here.
Very well. Thank you very much for joining us. The election of a speaker at Westminster is usually fairly straightforward, and we should say from the outset they're not exactly the same job. Our speaker here is, an impartial presiding officer. In the US, it's much more akin to something between our speaker and a prime minister and the leader of the Commons. They are the leader of the biggest party in the House of Representatives, and very much set the parliamentary agenda. What's been going on in Washington then? Why, given the Republicans have a majority in the House, can Kevin McCarthy not get over the line automatically?
Well, hopefully he will, but yeah, it's part of the process. And as you mentioned, it hasn't happened since 1923. There's a very small minority in the Republican House of the so-called Freedom Caucus, not necessarily only the Freedom Caucus or the entire Freedom Caucus, but there is this rogue group of 8 or 10 House representatives that don't want McCarthy to be Speaker. But the problem is they don't have an alternative. In your clip, Getz mentioned Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan made a fantastic and impassioned speech endorsing Kevin McCarthy. So it doesn't really make sense. I think it's self-destructive to say the least. There's a chance, a very small chance, that if they don't settle, then the Democrats with 212 votes and a pile of some rogue Republicans could elect a Democratic speaker. I mean, that's what Getz said in his speech, that he doesn't care if it was Hakeem Jeffries, which would be a disaster for the country and a disaster for democracy, because he's very undemocratic in his views on institutions. So, I think we have problems in both parties for sure, but the Republicans are won the House and ironically have the same majority that the Democrats had for 2 years. When you have a slim majority, it's absolutely crucial to have full support from your party. And I hope Kevin McCarthy is probably the only one who could get that. So I hope that it works out today.
Well, the hard right of the Republican Party being at war with its mainstream isn't necessarily a good look for your party ahead of a couple of years in which you'll be limbering up for a presidential election, and it's also
Yeah,
symptomatic, isn't it, of the bigger fight for the nomination? Will it be Trump? Will it be Ron
right.
DeSantis? Will it be someone from the middle of the party?
Yeah, look, I think that they're not necessarily um, being disruptive because they're conservative or far right. They're actually fringe in many ways, and it doesn't help the general party and doesn't help the country. So yeah, I think that's a good point, that a few holdouts are doing this, and Mrs. Pelosi had a much firmer grip on her party. She had some pretty crazy as some pretty extreme House representatives herself. The so-called squad, for example, but they came around when they needed to, and she ran. She kind of ran the party with a tight fist and did very well at it, frankly. And so I think the Republicans need that. Kevin McCarthy is a conservative. He's not some rhino soft moderate Republican. He's actually endorsed very conservative views. He's going to take a real leadership role on the border crisis, the humanitarian crisis at the border. So that's what we need. I don't think he disagrees that often with the 8 or 10 Republicans that are holding out. Might be a personality thing for sure, but you need a speaker who can get consensus. You can't really have a speaker who's got outspoken views but can't get a consensus or work at all with the other party. And I think we've learned from the last 2 years the disasters of the domestic policies coming out of the White House and the House and Senate, that but it has to be bipartisan. Legislation only works if it's bipartisan. You don't necessarily need everybody on board, but you need a handful of Democrats to legislate well. And I think Kevin McCarthy could do that. He's also a winner. He won 14 seats in 2000 when the White House was won by Biden. That's very notable. And then picked up 9 seats this time. He outraised the Democrats. And one of the reasons we lost the Senate is the Democrats clearly outraised and outspent the Republicans. Whereas in the House, Kevin McCarthy was able to, work the system and raise a lot of money for his candidates.
Well, Greg Swenson, chairman of Republicans Overseas, thanks very much for joining us
Great
to
to hear.
talk through
Thank you.
that drama last night in the House of Representatives on Capitol Hill. Still not elected a speaker despite the Republican majority, of course. You can hear more about that on Times Radio over the course of the day. Right.